I like working with the legislatures. I like working with the various and sundry commissions, but be called senator or representative, that didn't appeal to me particularly. There was a very secret project. It wasn't actually publicized until 1969. It was a forerunner of what we know now as drones, such as the Predator. This was a very primitive beginning, as you might add. They had so-called 5 mother pilots and attendant crews, and the project was an outgrowth of a guided bomb program headed up by a Major James Rand of the Remington Rand Corporation that had radio control bombs called Azon, and they took the basic electronics of that machine and transferred it over to B-17s. Then they equipped these drones with, believe it or not, 1944 television. It wasn't one of your big timers like you see today, but it was primitive, but it worked. We could navigate, the mothership could navigate off the drone with some limited visibility. It also had radio altimeter on it, of course the autopilot, and extra radio beams in case the drone was jammed by the Germans and the communication broke down. The actual success of the drones was really a flop. Now, I say that in retrospect because a lot was learned. I went to work for a thing called Associated Oregon Industry now. It was then called Columbia Empire Industries. They represented companies all throughout the state of Oregon and a little bit in Vancouver, Washington, and Walla Walla, Washington. And the manager said, well, we're going to have to start somewhere. He said, I'll pay your auto expense, you keep track. I want you to tour the state for 30 to 40 days and meet as many of these people you can. And if in the course of understanding what we're trying to do, get some new members. I was asked to join Pacific. In 1953, there was a very strong surge to take over the private companies, electric companies in Oregon. And there were some notable people who, I wouldn't call them socialists, but they had that inclination, Monroe Sweelan and Dick Newberger and some of those people. And I think, can't prove it, but I think they were aided and abetted a little bit by support from Bonneville. And by coincidence, the Oregon Constitution provides for a takeover of all utilities, which as I understand it, I haven't read it for so darn long, but at any rate, they could take over the telephone, the gas, electrics, whatever. In the meantime, we had a lot of 4 PUDs. In Oregon, they call them People's Utility Districts. In Washington, they're called Public Utility. They're really county enterprises. Tax-free, regulation-free. All their services are supplied by Bonneville, including their electric service, of course. And then in addition to that, you had a group called the REA, the Rural Electrification Units, which were farm cooperatives organized under the Cooperative Corporation Law. They were constantly being subjected to property acquisitions by the counties. At that time, anybody could serve any place. And in fact, it was the utility commissioner came up with the idea of certificates of your service areas. And it was a benefit for Pacific and Portland General because we competed in Portland, and that meant parallel lines and duplicate services, which the customer had to pay for. So we got rid of that onus for a while, permanently. And for a while, things stabilized, and then the PUDs made a massive effort to take over several of the REA properties. And Pacific was asked to help them, help the co-ops. And we did. And we, through the efforts of that utility commissioner's law, we thwarted any expansion on the part of the county PUDs and saved these little co-ops who were doing very well anyway and rendering an important service in the rural part of our state. Well, obviously, you better know what you're talking about and what your interests are. If you're down there to represent your company or your business interests, people are going to know it right away, and your identity would be, I wouldn't say biased, but it would be pretty obvious. My interest in the labor group during my times at the legislature, and for a moment after when I was in the ascendancy role at Pacific, the labor people were strong and not the education or employee unions. These are more the industrial unions, the longshore, the lumber sawmill, those types, machinists and electricians. And we had an incident in Pacific that I was dispatched to try to resolve, and fortunately it worked out. And as a result, we never had a strike. We never had a strike in the history of Pacific, which was something we were very proud of. Long and short of it, all those unions' policy changed in support of either private power or did not endorse either one. There was what's called a public relations department, which was an adjunct to the advertising department, and kind of superseded what we used to have was a sales department. But we, at one time, Pacific, like other electric companies, sold electric appliances. And that was finally stopped. And I was put in charge of our then public affairs department, which, among other things, had lobbyists at Olympia, and full-time in Cheyenne, Wyoming, and of course here. And then we had part-timers, sometimes of our law firm, would be in California, and we had local lawyers in Montana and Idaho. So in the course of that, and just general administrative chores, and I don't know, just being called into the management judgment processes, I guess I didn't do anything too bad, so they finally made me a vice president, which I thought was I was walking on the water. That was the ultimate then. I didn't know it was being president. And I was very involved in civic affairs. I was on several boards. I used to think it was a great honor to be on some of these civic boards, and I later woke up to the fact the only reason they wanted me on there was to help raise some money. But I was on several corporate boards, a mining company and a bank, and Bohemia Lumber, of course, and 2 or 3 others that put me into the community relationships. We got involved with some bond issues to rebuild the Portland Zoo, for example, which was a wonderful experience and a great zoo, golly. And that sort of thing. And then, I don't know, I called up one night and said I was supposed to be at such and such a place the next morning at 11 o'clock. And I walked in and they said, "Congratulations, you're elected president." So after I got through fainting, I assumed the role for about 7 years, and that was that. In the early days, you had people who did legislature as a civic contribution. They weren't concerned with offices. They weren't concerned with per diem. They weren't concerned with the minor expenses at the time. Whereas I think more and more of the legislators today are dependent on what they earn as a member of the House or Senate. That would be my summation. It may not be accurate, but that's kind of the way I feel. Where in my generation, these were pretty hard-working guys, and when the legislature was over, they went back to their own businesses.